Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, and this is the last interview in our series of developing other leaders. And if you've ever wondered how you can develop the younger folk at work, well, why don't we hear from the horse's mouth? And the horse's mouth on this occasion is Jordan Kibukamusoke. He is a consultant at Protiviti. It's a professional services firm in Canberra, which is part of a global financial consulting firm worldwide. And I know Jordan quite well. And full upfront confession, he is my nephew. So I've known him since he was 6. That's when I first met his uncle, my now husband, Rob. So I've seen Jordan grow up, and I've been particularly interested in his recent experiences as a new professional on the job. So Jordan's had lots of different jobs as he's grown up, and he talks a little bit about them in this interview. But I want to know what it's like to be a new person on the job in a professional services firm. What do you learn about work? What do you want from your leaders? And maybe dispel some of the concepts that we might have learned about with Gen Y. Jordan's coming up in just a moment. I thought I'd share a couple of updates with you because it's been a while since I did so. I've hurt my back, and it sucks, I have to say. This is a personal update now. I heard it sort of towards the end of March, so it's been 4 to 5 weeks. It's taking forever to heal. And this is what I'm learning about that, is that patience truly is a virtue and that you can't just keep charging on. It seems I have to keep relearning this lesson that rest and recovery really is an important part of your holistic well-being. So it's teaching me to pay a lot more attention to my body and to stop treating it just as a vessel for getting around, and that it is an integral part of my life experience as a leader and as a professional. So if you have the unfortunate experience of living only in your head and forgetting about your body, it's more of an afterthought, then, learn from my lesson and don't get the learning and not the lesson, and look after your body and make sure you rest and recover. That's sort of my whinge/lesson of the day. In another personal/professional update, work on the novel continues. My very first novel, World Builders, is in train, and it is in full angst mode, I have to say. So I'm riddled with, is this right? Will this work? Is this enough of a scene to make sure the point gets across? Is the language good? So a lot of self-doubt stuff. So I'm familiar with that feeling in writing a book, but because I've never written a novel before, it's kind of exacerbated. So in the coming weeks, I will be seeking support. It's time to get an editor so I can have a sounding board for this. I also have launched the World Builders Champions on Facebook, which is a private group that I invite you to jump on and jump in if you like, where I'll be sharing some of the behind the scenes experiences in writing the novel, inviting you to comment on things like character profiles, world concepts, get a preview of some of the text, weigh in on the title, which I do not have at all close to, maybe book cover design when we get down the track, that kind of stuff. So if you find it like it could be a fun opportunity to be part of building this first novel and participating in it, I would love your feedback because it's really hard to create in a vacuum. And if you want to jump on, feel free to do so. We'll put a link in the show notes of World Builders Champions, or you can search for it on Facebook and apply to be let in. Just say you're a podcast listener, which means I love you already, and we'll let you into the crowd and you can have a surf around there. All right, so that's World Builders Champions. What else? Amplifiers. So coming up soon in May 13 and 14 is our next Amplifiers immersion. So Amplifiers is my it's my heart and soul, basically. This is my mission to help support big thinkers with big hearts make a big difference. And in the Amplifiers group, both in the Canberra chapter and the virtual chapter, there are leaders, CEOs, managing directors, senior executives from many different sectors that come together with the aim and objective of developing more influence and impact and delivering bigger and better results year after year. That's the promise that I want for each of the leaders there. It's a combination of training delivery, so new content coming out each month, and we could take a deeper dive on the immersions, as well as a community that you can participate in so that you can meet your fellow leaders. And that's often the value of the program, is the diversity of the leaders in the group that you can use as a sounding board and a support. So if that's you and you want to in on the group, go to zoerouth.com/amplifiers-program. Check it out and reach out. You can email me at zoe@zoerouth.com, and we can have a conversation about amplifiers if you're ready to step up and have a bigger play, because I would love to have you there if that's you. All right. What else? Lately, I have been doing so many culture and strategy facilitation days, either working with executives and teams on their culture. So a lot of the teams are trying to recalibrate, reset, or come together and set a new agenda. And I love these days. So we talk about, pitfalls of working in teams. What are some common patterns and how to troubleshoot that? And we develop their team's culture compass, which is their culture charter to help them work better together. So what's good about working together, and what do they want to avoid, and what does success look like? So I love doing those kind of days. They're super fun. I've got a bunch of them coming up. And I do strategy days, and those are super fun too. And that's where I'm working with a couple of teams where they're focusing on developing the key results that they want to deliver in their organization, how the team's results fit together, and what strategies they can do to put it all together and move forward. So if you're interested in either of those pieces of work, pick me, because I love doing it. Again, just reach out, zoe@zoerouth.com, and that would be fantastic. All right, well, that's all of my little updates. Oh, one more, of course. We're coming up to the season finale. I'm going to do a wrap up for you to summarize some of the key points. And the season following is all about leading in complexity. So that's a little heads up what's coming next. And without further ado, let's get on to it. And here is Jordan. Jordan Kibukamusoke, all the way from Woden. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I love your perspective on workplaces because you are a new professional. So you're new to the professional environment after having graduated from uni. And it's always fascinating to get somebody's perspective who's new on the scene. And leaders really value that, to get that kind of different experience. So let's start way back before you've arrived in your current job at Protiviti, because you're not new to work. Like, even though you're in your early 20s, you started work at a crazy young age. So let's start there. What's your first job?
Sure. So at a very young age, as you mentioned, I actually started working at a golf course. So I was the guy that everyone would hit golf balls at on the tractor whilst I was picking them up. And I would also drive golf carts. So I had a lot of fun doing that. I think I started there when I was about 12 or 13. And then from there, I did some work doing some hospitality and retail for a while, probably 2 to 3 years.
Okay, just hang on a second. I want to talk about the golf thing for a second. Yeah.
Sure.
So you were target practice, and the guy had to pick up golf balls and everything.
Absolutely.
Did you ever get hit by a golf ball?
Yeah, I did. So the tractor itself was a little bit sketchy. It had a cage around it, but the cage had holes in it. So sometimes, if you were lucky, the golf ball would get straight into the cage and ping around and then hit you. There's so many laws, I think, that were broken having a young kid drive a golf cart and get pinged by people plugging balls at them. But aside from that, aside from putting your life on the limb, I think, God, what's that expression? What did you learn about working at such a young age? I think I learned that work is not necessarily just you. So when you're working in an organization and a company, there are a lot of moving parts. Specifically for my case, there were multiple different levels that I had to learn to negotiate from a young age. And starting to understand that when you're so young is an interesting one for sure. Who your managers are, what the role of a manager is, who you go to talk about what. I think those intricacies were the things that I had to learn from a young age.
Did anybody teach you those, or did you just work them out?
No, not at all. In that environment, it was no structured training for this is how a workplace operates. It was this is the workplace, start operating.
Sink or swim, really? Figure it out as you go along.
Literally.
Jeez.
But thankfully, it wasn't a high pressure environment or anything like that. It was just a welcome to the workforce moment.
And then, so from there, you went into hospitality. Was it similar there, or did people actually show you what to do?
Similar in the sense that, again, no formal training. It was run these coffees and take the food while it's hot. So I guess the only difference there was starting to learn priority management, who you prioritize first, what orders you need to prioritize, how to deal with customers because they can be prickly from time to time. So again, it was starting to get a little bit more training, but nothing overly specific.
Oh, I'm curious now. So when you are serving food and coffee, what's the critical decision for prioritizing? Is it like who's crankiest, or is it what will get cold first, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we had some set rules of if someone had some pressing dietary requirements, say they were a diabetic and they needed food instantly, they would be prioritized. Otherwise, hot food went first, followed by cold food, and coffees at the same time if possible.
Yeah, okay. I've worked in restaurants for 10 years. I never had diabetes being a priority thing. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, we had a couple of instances where people would come to the counter and say, hi, my son's a diabetic, or I'm a diabetic. They need food ASAP. Can you please help us out? So,
wow, well, that's one way to get your food first, isn't it?
Yeah, how to jump the queue 101.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so then from hospitality, then you went to uni, or you did hospitality while you were at university?
Yeah, so I was at hospitality when I was in uni. And then from hospitality, I moved over to the public sector, working in federal government.
Wow. And that's quite a contrasting environment. What did you discover in that transition?
I think the biggest discovery there was about the hierarchies. Like everything had a process, everything had a protocol. Someone was responsible for something, and often parts didn't move unless that person was there to be responsible for it.
Wow. So nobody would sub in. It's like that person or nothing.
Yeah, pretty much. Particularly when projects had to be cleared or action items in project had to be initiated, it really had to go through the right channels. And so I think I was surprised by the delay that sometimes took in order to do what I thought were high priority or critical things. But in saying that, the system functioned and we managed to deliver all projects. So that was a good thing.
Okay. And then you've ended up, and is the next jump into Protiviti where you are now?
Yeah, so I had a little stint in the private sector before I got to Protiviti. But yes, then as a graduate, I joined Protiviti.
And tell us a little bit about Protiviti.
So Protiviti is an international consulting firm. I think there are around 80 offices globally, and I'm based out of the Canberra office, specifically doing some business management type consulting.
Okay, well, that's another completely different environment again, and a different way of working. What have you discovered since you started in terms of your impression of work and how work works moving into a management consultancy firm?
Yeah, work has been totally different. I was surprised with the emphasis that has been placed on professional development and feedback. So I think that was the biggest change for me when entering professional services. They had so many structures in place in order to make me feel supported, like I wasn't really alone. I think the best part has been that I've got buddies and career advisors and mentors and people that I can go to talk about stuff, but also who advocate on my behalf. So they can express my interests of projects that I want to work on, or places that I want to work, roles that I want to take on. And I think I wasn't really expecting that. I think I was expecting corporate world to be a little bit more dog eat dog. So it's a nice surprise.
Wow, that's really interesting that you thought it was going to be dog eat dog. Why did you think it was going to be dog eat dog?
The movies. Yeah. Yeah, it was the movies, yeah. Or even TV shows. Suits is a good example. Wolf of Wall Street. Yeah.
Well, those are legal firms, and I'm married to a lawyer, so it's a completely different environment again than consulting.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on. You're going to say something.
I was just going to say, I think that consulting is almost a tricky one to convey. I don't think that there's a clear understanding by a lot of people when you sign up to consulting as someone who hasn't really experienced the area before. And so you can only kind of go in and you can ask the questions, but ultimately maybe your perception is suits.
Yeah, okay. So you go with that bias into the experience. And with consulting, you go into a whole bunch of different workplaces. It's not just the one office, the Protiviti head office in Canberra. You go into other workplaces to do your consulting work. What have you discovered about work and culture as you go around these different workplaces?
I think it's pretty evident that everywhere is super different in terms of that workplace culture stuff. I did a small stint at a federal government department, and I remember that I think it wasn't even a casual Friday. It was a regular Tuesday, and some members of one of the teams turned up in Hawaiian shirts, board shorts, and thongs, flip-flops. And I was so shocked because I was like, well, yeah, I always thought you had to wear your button-up and your dress attire. Thankfully, my company is pretty relaxed on what you can wear to and from the office, but that was definitely a bit of a cultural whoa moment. I guess more specifically than that, though, even the way that teams and people operate. So, what's deemed acceptable, what's not deemed acceptable, how we go about anticipating deadlines and how we work towards them as a team or individually. I think that cultural stuff is different.
Yeah, right. So I'm curious now about acceptable, not acceptable. So, I'm always surprised by what teams think is acceptable. Did you have that experience too? You're like, ooh, this team thinks that's acceptable?
I think even just how you operate in meetings. So some teams that I've worked in and for will start the meeting precisely on the hour and you talk about work from the get-go. Other teams who perhaps are more comfortable with one another will start when they feel like starting. So it's come into the room, have a chat, feel confident, feel comfortable, and then get on to the more important topics. So I think that's been a bit of an understanding to have for sure.
Which do you prefer?
Definitely depends on the scenario. But for me, I think the latter. So going in, getting to know one another if you don't already, and then jumping into what you're there to talk about can be really good. When those personal barriers are broken down a little bit, I think people are more willing to interact and discuss the important stuff.
Okay, that's really interesting observation. So you've worked with a number of different leaders. What have you liked and what have you disliked in terms of working with them?
I mean, it's a pretty big concept, leadership, and in terms of things that I've liked and what I haven't necessarily liked. So I've tried to think about a couple that I do like. The first of which is a feeling of value, which I think stems from approachability, communication, and listening. So when I feel comfortable approaching my leaders, when I know that I'm being listened to, when there's open communication in that regard, I really enjoy that type of team setting. Another one is flexible leadership styles. So it's not that cookie cutter approach to managing teams. I think it's pretty evident in the spaces that I've worked in that a lot of different people operate really differently depending on their own personal biases and what their interests are. And so having a leader that can adapt their leadership style to get the most out of their team is a really good thing. And then the other thing that I find has been really enjoyable, the leaders who are not afraid of rolling their sleeves up when the going gets tough and getting down and dirty with it. If there's work that needs to be done, they're not afraid to step up and lend a hand. It's not beneath them.
Cool. Well, that sounds like a wonderful description. And I love the way that you put that picture of somebody who's versatile and has a sense of camaraderie and egalitarianism. And I'm just thinking about that in the background of where you are now and describing Protiviti as the way that they support you and mentor you and you have a buddy system and everything. Do you have aspirations to be a team leader yourself?
I think I do. But at the same time, I think that I am a leader to some regard already. Maybe not specifically by title in the professional space, but in terms of my other life avenues amongst friends and family, I think that leadership doesn't necessarily correspond directly with titles. But in saying that, I do have aspirations to have maybe a leadership title one day.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to poke around a little bit in this. What kind of leadership roles do you take in your personal life?
What type of roles do I take in my personal life?
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have a title of, leader of friendship group.
For sure.
How do you feel you demonstrate leadership in your personal world?
I think specifically for my siblings, I always try to act as somewhat of a sounding board for them, because I've just been through a lot of the stuff that they've been through in terms of applying for jobs or approaches to uni, even what to apply for at uni. So I feel like I act as a leader in that regard. In terms of, friend circles, it's not that specific leadership title stuff. But even just in terms of, where do we want dinner tonight? Regular operating stuff. I think that I stand up as, being a leader in some regards there. Oh,
so you're the guy with the ideas of what fun stuff we can do.
I know I'm the guy who makes the decision. No, I'm joking. No.
You take everybody's ideas and say, that's it. I don't care where you guys want. We're going here.
No. I think that my friends love being spontaneous. And so sometimes just sitting down and saying, okay, let's just go and do this is what needs to happen.
I see. Okay, cool. Love it. So what interests you in terms of getting a formal leadership role, like the title, the authority? So what is it that you find interesting or attractive about that?
I think you've used an interesting word there when you say authority, because as I'm starting to lead small teams now, it's the authority part that I think is not awkward, but the part that is taking the most to become accustomed to. So when you start to delegate tasks and when you start to say, this is something that we need done, would you look to help with this? I think that part of leadership is the bit that I'll have to adjust to the most. But in terms of, what attracts me to the idea, I like the idea that I can contribute and help others grow and mature as, I hopefully have. And I think a position of leadership systemically and non-systemically often gives you a place to do so.
Yeah, that's very nice. And so what is it about like asking people to do stuff, the authority piece, you find awkward?
I think it's more about not necessarily coming from a position where you've had to do that before. So it's almost like a change of mindset from saying, yeah, I'll do whatever tasks you give me, to, okay, let me prioritize the ones I actually want to focus on and what tasks can these people help me with. I think it's just the change in mindset is something that'll take a little bit of adjustment.
Okay. So it's just figuring it out and having a bit more outward focus than just personal responsibility focus.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What's your approach? Like, do you have a plan for your leadership development? Have you got a way of going about developing these skills or not? You're hoping organically to pick things up?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think I'm lucky in that my organization, they have some structures in place in order to help upskill and train as you get promoted. So I think there are different responsibilities at each promotion level, and they try to equip you and train you to deal with some of the new challenges that you'll have at each level. But in saying that, I think learning on the job is such an important thing. Getting to see leaders in action and how they respond to scenarios and problems is where I'll learn the most, I feel.
Okay, cool. That's great. So let's talk about Gen Y, right? So you sit squarely in the Gen Y camp as a younger member of the generation. There's a lot of, and I'd be Gen Z, older. When it comes to generation, I don't know what, they could be myths, they could be impressions that people have. And certainly there's been a lot made of Gen Y, and certainly conversations in the media about Gen Y feeling entitled and privileged and being babied and always needing praise. Do you think these are myths that are true, or are they simply myths? I mean, and I'm asking you a big call, speak on behalf of your entire generation because you know everyone. So let's maybe say these are things that are said about your generation. In your experience with your peer group, how do you respond to some of those myths?
I mean, it's a pretty big question, right? I think often myths don't just spawn out of nowhere. So some people had to have felt a certain way in order to think that maybe people from my generation felt entitled, or that they always want a gold star for everything, for example. I think for me, the idea of entitlement is a pretty tricky one. I think it's quite complex, specifically in the terms of, expressing interest or disinterest to work in, specific areas or do certain jobs. So ultimately, the bad jobs will have to be done by somebody, right? But for me personally, when I'm more interested and when I'm more engaged in the work that I'm doing, I think that I'll strive to deliver better outputs. I think a lot of that interest-driven motivation is somewhat subconscious. So, consciously, I'll always, try my best to give a good effort and do the best that I can. But when I'm more engaged and interested in the work that I'm actually doing, then the drive to go above and beyond comes from somewhere else. So I think in terms of leaders and what they can do in this space, I think that signposts how you can use your resourcing models. So if you've got a bunch of people who ultimately become really interested and passionate about doing certain types of work, and we assume that they'll want to go and do the best that they can in those areas of interest, then mapping where people are interested and the types of jobs that they want to do should or could yield better outcomes for everybody, the people doing the work, the organization that you're working for. So I get at the end of the day that some of the bad jobs have to be done, but hopefully when you map interests, some people are interested in doing some jobs and some are interested in doing others. So I think going back to the root of the question around entitlement, it's a tricky one. I think that perhaps now, because we are given opportunities and platforms to express interest in doing particular types of work or roles, a lot of us are taking the opportunity to do so. But at the same time, leaders should also be able to capitalize on that and make their resourcing models better as well.
Okay. So a little bit of what I heard was the boring jobs are boring and you want to work on something interesting. And that's a way, you'll be more enthusiastic that way. Some people may interpret that as being entitled, and maybe that comes from a Gen X framework of thing, you got to earn your stripes. Do you have that sense that that's an ethos in the workplaces that you've experienced, that you got to earn your stripes is something that is prevalent?
I don't think so specifically in a lot of the places that I've worked, but in terms of, perhaps where I've heard stories in the past of others having worked there, I think for sure, everyone's different, right? So some Gen X who would definitely believe in this myth, if you'd like to say, I'm sure that they would feel that you have to earn your stripes always. The respect is not necessarily given, but earned. But in that regard, I think I've been quite lucky in that, what I'm interested in has governed a lot of the work that I've been able to do.
Okay. I think, the earn your stripes piece and getting opportunities is often linked to needing experience. And if I'm thinking about some of the conversations over the years that people had about Gen Y and employers kind of whinging that the Gen Ys come and say they automatically want to get promoted to manager and they haven't done anything yet. And I'm wondering, I always sort of took that with a grain of salt, thinking, well, the people in the younger generation have learned a lot more quickly because of internet and because of access to technology, accelerated the rate of accumulating knowledge and know-how. Have you seen that? People come into workplace and they want to get promoted pretty quickly. Is it less about, in your mind, being promoted and more about exploring interests?
I think promotion comes with responsibility. And maybe changing expectations. So I think often that the idea of promotion as a new worker is a good thing, right? It's you work hard, you get promoted, you get more money. But I think when you unpack the responsibilities and the expectation changes of what maybe that promotion entails, it's not as simple as that. So I think the naive approach is, let's get promoted as soon as possible. But at the same time, a saying that one of my leaders at the moment says is, you don't want to get promoted to a feeling of incompetence. So it's good to feel, supported and that you can lead in safe environments. But at the same time, you don't want to get to somewhere where you feel completely out of your depth and you struggle to swim at that point.
Yeah, we often talk about that, is people go from being an expert to being promoted into a manager, and all of a sudden they do feel incompetent because it's a totally different set of skills to be expert in one area than it is to manage people. And that's where often a lot of leaders fall over. And that's very sensible of them to say, yes, we'll build on your expertise so that you can ease into it rather than just, flailing around, having a go. What's one thing that you wish older workers, so anybody over 24, what's one thing that you wish older workers really knew and understood about younger workers?
I think for me, it's that we're not all the same. So touching on what I was talking about previously in terms of motivation and interests, I think it's important for leaders to not always put people in the same demographical buckets, whether they're old or young or male or female, and try to match interests and what would work for a whole demographic like that. Obviously, there are instances when you have to make macro decisions, but at the individual or the project level, I think understanding that we're all different is a really good thing, and it means that you can get the most out of your teams.
That is sensible advice, no matter what generation, I think, Jordy. That's really good. This is a really interesting one for me, and I've become aware of these issues just because in conversations with you, say, for example, what are some things that older workers take for granted, but are like a big issue for younger workers? Something that you just wouldn't think of necessarily because you've been in the workforce for 20 odd years, but it's a big deal for new workers.
Yeah, so I think the biggest one for me here is actually time. 10 minutes to someone who's way more experienced or someone who's much older might seem like a time waste, or some time spent better doing something else, too busy, or would take longer to explain it than to do it themselves. But for me, I think something that I really value is when my leaders give me time. And obviously that's something that can't always happen, but I believe that a lot of my learning can come from my leaders and their experience. And so I really appreciate when I'm given the time to explain, help, listen, and guide.
Wow, I would not have picked that. I was going to say, the cost of parking and the cost of petrol. Like, you've recently moved out of home and discovering the joys and the challenges of managing your own budget and household. Does any of that relevant to your workplace experience or not?
In terms of what, sorry?
So the stuff that older workers might take for granted, like what it's like to actually pay bills on a starter salary. Like, if you've been working for 20 years, likely you're earning a lot more than the newer generation. And it actually costs quite a bit to live independently. Is that an issue for you or not really?
I think having just transitioned from uni life, cost of living hasn't really changed that much. In saying that, I moved out recently, so let's put a caveat on that. But I think at the same time, I'm still trying to live by the idea of, living like a student. So I try to keep my costs as low as I possibly can. I think a lot of the people that I've worked with are conscious that lower level staff are not earning quite as much. And so if there's an opportunity for them to pay for something, a lot of them have been very willing to put their hand up to do so. But at the same time, life is expensive, and relative to income and salary speaking, yeah, absolutely. There are definitely things that are more costly for us than people who are more senior.
Cool. So, technical question about where you get your learning. So we've talked a lot about learning on the job, learning from your mentors, learning from experienced people. Do you read blogs, listen to podcasts? Where do you get your information, mind expansion? Do you read books? Do you listen to audiobooks? This is market research now.
Funnily enough, I recently deleted all my social media.
Wow. All of them?
Yeah.
All accounts?
Yeah. I deleted them from my phone. So I still have the accounts, but I got rid of the apps. I kind of felt like I was just spending a little bit too much time that I didn't necessarily want to be spending on the apps. And so for me now, I make probably more conscious decisions to get information when I want to get it. So I subscribe to the Australian Financial Review, which I find to be pretty interesting in terms of some less heavy news. I listen to a couple of podcasts, one about golf.
One about golf? Okay, yep.
Yeah, one about golf, one about basketball, which is good fun. And then from time to time, I'll also try and catch some headline-based news off YouTube for sure.
Really? Headline news off YouTube. Interesting. Okay. So you don't really go for your professional development through those kind of media channels then?
Not yet. I think I use media to unwind rather than upskill at this point. So I think professional development is a great thing, but at the same time, given the amount of time that I get to kind of have to myself and unwind, I kind of want to just not do that.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. That's awesome. What advice do you have for younger workers going into workplaces?
I think just be open, keen and eager to learn. Some of the best advice that I was given when I started was that the one thing that you have control over is your attitude. And so when you go in with a positive attitude, ready to try your best, ready to collaborate with others to the best of your ability, to put your head down when it needs to be put down, I think that you're ultimately doing the best that you can do. So go in with a good attitude and ready to listen and learn.
Hey, that's good advice. What do you enjoy most about working in professional services?
I think specifically for me, my world changes relatively quickly. So each project I'm on, my role or what the project orients around is different, which keeps me on my toes and keeps me in a place of learning. I think if I was doing the same thing in and out every day, I'd get a bit bored of it. So I think I'm pretty lucky like that I get to try a lot of stuff and figure out what I like and learn a bunch of things and then look to specialize a little later on.
And do you want to, like, when the world opens up again and we can travel, is travel something that you want to do with work, or are you happy based in Canberra?
No, I think I definitely want to travel with work. I'm not really sure what that looks like yet. I think I'd love to maybe give an MBA a go. I like the idea of doing an MBA overseas at some point and potentially working overseas for a little bit. I studied overseas on exchange for a while and loved it. So I think maybe the opportunity to work and also try that would be really fun.
Yeah, you went to that really awesome country called Canada.
I did go to that awesome country called Canada, yes.
That was a good pick, I have to say. And there you met many awesome Canadians.
I did, and it was really cold. They weren't lying.
I know. I love your arrival story. You showed up. It was January, wasn't it, or something like that?
Yeah. So like I just come from a music festival in Australia, and it was about 35 degrees, and we had a layover in Korea, but when we got there, it was very late. And so the next morning, when I went to put on my clothes, I kind of just chucked on a t-shirt and some pants. And when I landed in Toronto, it was negative 30 degrees. And I'd never experienced anything that cold. So it was like a 60-degree weather change. And I walked outside and the air was sucked out of my lungs. I wish I could say I was exaggerating, but it was such a radical shock to the system. So it was a welcome to Canada for sure.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, oh my God. Then you went back in and put some clothes on.
Oh yeah, super quickly.
That's awesome. So I'm interested in like the culture shock pieces. What are 3 things that you thought were really interesting about Canada, like that really stick out as a first visitor's impressions?
3 things. So first things first, I would say that Canadians are quite punctual. So
really?
Yeah. So I reckon first 8 or 9 uni lectures I attended, I was at least 10 to 15 minutes late, because what happened was in Australia, we finish uni at 10 minutes or lectures 10 minutes before the hour and would probably start 10 minutes after the hour. And so there was always time to walk to class and kind of get there and get a drink on the way. So getting to Canada, it was a bit of a rude awakening when I was super late. And I thought it might have just been the first couple of classes I was trying, but no, it was all classes. So I think that was a bit of an awakening. I think that the people, it was true. The people were really friendly. Everyone was super interested to know where I'd come from and why I decided to come to Canada with it being so cold, especially their ideas of what Australia was like. We all live at the beach and we're all tall, blonde, blue eyes and surf every day. So it was really interesting to hear some of those Hollywood-like stories how people perceived Australia. But in saying that, people were really lovely and really nice. The third one, I think, was that I really enjoyed the atmosphere of the cities, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I think Montreal felt very different to Vancouver, which felt very different to Toronto and Alberta. They all had their own feel, but without having done much research on Canada before I'd gone, I was kind of just expecting it all to be Canada. So I think that was a bit of a surprise for me, for sure.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So can you describe the different feelings between Toronto, Vancouver, and wherever else you went?
Yeah. So I think that Toronto portrays itself a little bit as very culturally diverse, and I think it has that feeling. You can go down the road and get a burrito. You can also get Indian food. There are festivals, all sorts of stuff. So I think it is quite culturally diverse. Montreal felt almost European. It had a completely different feeling to Toronto in that the architecture was different. The way people interacted, it was French first, then English. So I thought that was interesting. Vancouver felt more chilled out than the others. So it kind of had more of that West Coast, California vibe to it with, skiing in the mountains, go for a hike. But also it was still a really nice place to be. I think Alberta was a bit of a peculiar one. I went to Banff, so I didn't realize that it got so cold every winter. And for people to be totally okay with that was such a surprise. I was like, it gets to minus 40 here every winter. That's crazy.
You're like, why are these people living here? Some of them moved to Australia. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, speak of the devil. Yeah.
That's right. You can survive it if you have good clothes and good insulation in your house.
Well, it was weird. When my family came to visit me, I'd become acclimatized. And so I think it was a day that was, 0 or 2 degrees. And we were going for a walk outside and I was in shorts, an NBA jersey and some sandals, essentially. So I'd been acclimatized.
So 0 felt like, yeah, it's warm compared to minus 30.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And your family is going, oh my goodness.
Yeah, Mum thought I was going to be sick for sure.
That's hilarious. Jordan, thank you so much for sharing so much about your work experience, your insight into the workplace, what leadership means to you, what you want from work, and also your insights on Canada, which of course I have a personal interest in and affection for. So it's been wonderful speaking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm already biased because Jordan's my nephew. I think he is incredibly smart, very eloquent, and very diligent. I mean, that's what stood out for me in this particular interview. And a couple of things he said really stuck out for me also from a leader developing other leaders' point of view. And his observation that work is not just about you, I think is just a wonderful observation. I think that's so true, and that'll resonate at whatever stage of development you are at. And the other thing that surprised me, what do young people want from their leaders? And his response was time, time with me so I can understand your experience, your expertise, and learn from your wisdom. I think, wow, that is fantastic. And it's not something that leaders would automatically jump to when it comes to developing other leaders. So just showing up and having time with somebody is super important. Well, that was wonderful. Love your insight. Love to hear your comments, what you found interesting, what you found thought-provoking. Leave a comment in anywhere of the platforms that you're listening to us. Shoot me an email, zoe@zoerouth.com. And in the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.